Griselda Blanco, often known as La Madrina or the Black Widow, was born on February 15, 1943, in the poverty-stricken town of Santa Marta on the northern coast of Colombia. Raised in a country rife with political unrest and socioeconomic disparities, Blanco's early life was marked by hardship, violence, and survival instincts. Her mother, Ana Lucia Restrepo, was a poor single woman who struggled to make ends meet, and Griselda's father was absent from her life. When she was just 3 years old, Blanco and her mother moved to the slums of Medellín, Colombia, where she would grow up. Medellín, even at that time, was known for its high crime rates, drug trafficking, and violent underworld. These were the streets that Griselda would navigate during her formative years, shaping her into one of the most ruthless and feared figures in the world of organized crime. Blanco's childhood was defined by neglect and violence, and she was exposed to the harsh realities of life at an early age. It is said that by the time she was 11, she had committed her first crime, kidnapping and, allegedly, killing a child from a wealthy family for ransom. Though this story remains unverified, it speaks to the early development of Blanco's criminal tendencies and her capacity for violence. Living in extreme poverty, Blanco quickly learned to manipulate her surroundings using violence and intimidation as tools to survive and, eventually, thrive. Though this story remains unverified, it speaks to the early development of Blanco's criminal tendencies and her capacity for violence. Blanco's entry into the world of organized crime began in her teens, though the specifics are difficult to pinpoint due to the shadowy nature of her early life. Like many young women in Medellín, she initially turned to prostitution as a means of survival. However, Blanco was not content with the meager earnings and the risks associated with sex work. She had ambitions for power and wealth that far exceeded the limits of the Medellín streets. In the 1960s, Blanco married Carlos Trujillo, a small-time smuggler with whom she had 3 children. This marriage marked her entry into the world of drug trafficking, a business that would come to define her life. Trujillo introduced Blanco to the world of contraband, teaching her the skills she needed to navigate the dangerous and lucrative world of smuggling. Though their relationship was volatile and violent, it provided Blanco with the foundational knowledge she would later use to build her own empire. It is widely believed that Blanco was responsible for Trujillo's death, the first in a series of husbands she would allegedly murder throughout her life, earning her the nickname the Black Widow. Blanco's criminal activities escalated when she moved to the United States in the early 1970s, leaving behind the slums of Medellín for the promise of wealth in Miami, Florida. At that time, the United States was becoming the epicenter of the global drug trade, particularly as demand for cocaine soared among the American elite. Blanco saw an opportunity to capitalize on this growing market, and she seized it with ruthless determination. Blanco's criminal activities escalated when she moved to the United States in the early 1970s, leaving behind the slums of Medellín for the promise of wealth in Miami, Florida. Griselda Blanco's rise to power began in earnest in the early 1970s when she became one of the key players in the burgeoning cocaine trade between Colombia and the United States. Operating initially out of New York, she was instrumental in setting up one of the earliest drug trafficking routes from Medellín to the U.S. She is often credited with pioneering the cocaine cowboys era, a period marked by extreme violence, flamboyant lifestyles, and an unprecedented influx of Colombian cocaine into the United States. Blanco's approach to drug trafficking was revolutionary in its brutality and efficiency. She recognized early on that in order to dominate the cocaine trade, she would need to establish control over every aspect of the supply chain, from production in Colombia to distribution in the United States. Using a network of couriers, many of them women who concealed cocaine in their clothing or luggage, Blanco was able to smuggle large quantities of cocaine into the U.S. She was one of the first traffickers to utilize such methods, which allowed her to evade detection by law enforcement for years. Blanco's influence grew rapidly as she expanded her operations from New York to Miami, which became the epicenter of her drug empire. Miami, with its close proximity to the Caribbean and Latin America, was the perfect hub for cocaine smuggling, and Blanco quickly established herself as the queen of the Miami drug trade. Her organization, often referred to as the Blanco Cartel, controlled much of the cocaine that entered the United States during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Using a network of couriers, many of them women who concealed cocaine in their clothing or luggage, Blanco was able to smuggle large quantities of cocaine into the U.S. She was one of the first traffickers to utilize such methods, which allowed her to evade detection by law enforcement for years. What set Griselda Blanco apart from other drug lords was her unique combination of business acumen and a complete disregard for human life. Blanco understood the intricacies of the cocaine trade, but more importantly, she knew how to eliminate her competition. Violence was not just a tool for self-defense, it was a strategy for domination. Blanco's preferred method of operation was assassination, and she is believed to have ordered the murders of hundreds, if not thousands, of people during her reign. Rival drug dealers, disloyal employees, and law enforcement officers were all potential targets. Blanco's willingness to kill without hesitation earned her a reputation as one of the most feared figures in the criminal underworld. She is credited with popularizing the use of the motorcycle drive-by shooting in Miami, a tactic that allowed assassins to quickly escape the scene of a crime without detection. One of the most infamous killings associated with Blanco was the 1979 murder of 2 drug dealers in a Miami shopping mall. The killings were carried out in broad daylight, with no regard for public safety, signaling the brazenness with which Blanco operated. This incident, along with many others, marked the beginning of the infamous Miami drug wars, a period of unprecedented violence that gripped the city throughout the 1980s. Blanco's violent methods extended to her personal life as well. She was known for her tumultuous relationships with her husbands and lovers, many of whom met untimely deaths. Her second husband, Alberto Bravo, was shot and killed in a parking lot in Bogotá, Colombia, after a heated argument over missing drug money. According to legend, Blanco confronted Bravo with accusations of embezzlement. The confrontation ended in a gunfight, with Blanco emerging victorious. This event further solidified her status as a woman who was not to be crossed. Blanco's criminal career was marked by a series of high-profile incidents that underscored the scale of her operations and the level of violence she unleashed on her rivals and enemies. The Miami drug wars in particular were a period of chaos and bloodshed, with Blanco's cartel playing a central role in the carnage. The violence that Blanco unleashed on Miami claimed the lives of countless individuals, both directly and indirectly involved in the drug trade. Innocent civilians were often caught in the crossfire as Blanco's hitmen carried out assassinations in public spaces. The brutality of these killings shocked the American public and drew significant attention from law enforcement agencies. However, despite the growing body count, Blanco's empire continued to thrive, fueled by the insatiable demand for cocaine in the United States. One of the most chilling aspects of Blanco's reign was her apparent indifference to the suffering of others. She viewed violence as a necessary part of doing business, and her willingness to kill anyone who stood in her way made her one of the most dangerous figures in the drug trade. Even her own family was not immune to her wrath. In 1983, Blanco's son, Osvaldo Trujillo, was murdered in Colombia, allegedly on the orders of rival drug traffickers. Though devastated by the loss, Blanco continued to orchestrate killings with the same cold precision that had characterized her rise to power. Even her own family was not immune to her wrath. In 1983, Blanco's son, Osvaldo Trujillo, was murdered in Colombia. By the early 1980s, Griselda Blanco's reign of terror in Miami had attracted the full attention of U.S. law enforcement. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, along with local police forces, launched an extensive investigation into her operations. Blanco, who had managed to evade capture for years, was now one of the most wanted criminals in the United States. Despite her efforts to maintain a low profile, Blanco's violent tactics made her a prime target for law enforcement. The DEA began building a case against her, using undercover agents and informants to gather evidence of her drug trafficking activities. As a pioneer in the cocaine trade, she not only changed the landscape of drug trafficking, but also altered the perceptions of women in positions of power within organized crime. Through her rise to prominence and subsequent decline, Blanco became a symbol of the violence that defined the drug wars of the 1980s and 1990s. Her story continues to resonate, serving as both a cautionary tale and a source of intrigue for those drawn to the complexities of crime, power, and morality.